Hello, U.S. history. Welcome back to another Varela's videos. Here we're going to be talking about the American women's suffrage movement, which is the work to try and get women the right to vote finally. So I have your title here. Plus, you can see I put the word suffrage, which equals the right to vote. There's your good definition. But I want you to also become familiar with the word enfranchisement. If you pay attention to the news, you hear that word used often about enfranchisement or disenfranchisement. It basically is your power. And obviously, as citizens, our power is voting. So let's talk about how women finally get the right to vote. Okay, so we're looking at a quote, and this is a long quote, I know, but I'm going to ask that you copy it because it is really important. And then after you're done copying it, just take a moment to just kind of think about what you feel like this quote would mean to you. If we were together in the classroom, we would have a discussion about this. This is a quote from the second First Lady of the United States, Abigail Adams. So way back in 1776, she said this quote in a letter to her husband, basically as the Declaration of Independence was being formulated. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And, by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. So Abigail Adams, in a letter to her husband, says this amazing quote, which is, here you are men fighting for independence, and you feel that no one's listening to you. Remember the ladies. So go ahead and copy that into your notebook. It's just one of those things where there aren't many quotes I will make you write down this year, but this is one of them. Okay, so moving on to our next discussion. This is something that we sort of referenced for a moment, and you're going to read more about it in your textbook. But when we talk about the women's rights movement and when it started, I like to say it starts in New York in the year 1848, specifically at a convention called the Seneca Falls Convention. Many women were involved in the anti-slavery movement. And so this was one of the first areas they would get together and voice their support of abolition or anti-slavery, but also the temperance movement. And we're learning about that right now as well, the no alcohol movement. And what you're going to see here is a gathering in New York of both men and women to talk about how we can channel our energies into ending slavery. And this is way back in 1848. The two women you see here, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, are some of our earliest feminist leaders. And they're basically working towards writing a document that they're going to call the Declaration of Rights for men and women. And one of my favorite parts of that document says that it just references lots of parts of the Declaration of Independence, but also includes the words women. For the first time, we're seeing that happen in our country. So their document officially is called the Declaration of Sentiments, but it's basically a list of the rights that they feel women should be given. And not only equal rights, like, for example, voting, but just the rights to opportunities. So this is sort of where we say the women's movement begins, way back in 1848. So to review some of our voting practices, we learned about in Unit 2, the 15th Amendment being passed. Now, this was the amendment that was passed in 1870 that gives basically African American men the right to vote. And what's interesting is that this spawned a debate about should African American men get the right to vote before women, so all women. Clearly, the answer in 1870 was yes. So I feel like we're looking at a gender issue here, not so much a race issue. But this was the 15th Amendment. So where do we go from there? Here's another hopefully familiar name, Sojourner Truth, very famous abolitionist. You can just read her quote here. You don't have to copy it down unless you want to. It's an amazing quote. But basically, she talks about in her lectures that she did after the Civil War, she spoke about racism and discrimination, but she also is talking about the rights of women. So she said, there is a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about the colored women. And if colored men get their rights and not colored women theirs, you see the colored men will be masters over the women, and it will be just as bad as it was before. So I'm going to change my mind on that and actually have you write that one down because I forgot how good that was. But we're talking about the fact that if we're looking at freedom and we're ending slavery and trying to start our country anew, how can we start a country anew when not only are we dealing with racial inequalities, but definitely gender inequalities? So I'm going to say copy that quote down too. Other important female voices for this time period are going to be Susan B. Anthony, who we're going to look at in just a moment. But I want you to look at the year 1910 because I feel like that's kind of an interesting point in this journey for women getting the right to vote. That's going to be the formation of this group, the National American Women Suffrage Association. And remember, suffrage means the right to vote. So this was their official name. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony are the ones that are pretty much the two advocates and voices behind it. They are the one trying to lobby Congress to get the amendment to allow women to have the right to vote passed. Their two strategies actually include trying to win the right to vote state by state, because it was very common for states in the Midwest and West to let women vote in state elections and local elections. And that's because their populations were so small, they needed more voices. So they let women vote. Ironically, it's the older parts of our country, like New York, where women cannot vote at all. So they're trying to see if they can convince states by states to let women to let more states let women have the right to vote. And they feel like another possibility is to pass a constitutional amendment through the states. There are actually different ways to propose amendments to our Constitution. And one of those possibilities is actually getting states to ask Congress. But you have to get 3/4 of the states to agree. And that is hard to do. That's 75%. But they figured those are the best ways to possibly get the right to vote given to women because Congress was not going to do it on their own, at least before 1910. So let's look at Susan B. Anthony. So she was really around, I would say, towards the later 1800s. She tries herself to actually write an amendment and introduce it to the Constitution. Every time she tries, it gets killed in the Senate. Nobody really wants to discuss and really work towards giving women the right to vote. In fact, Susan B. Anthony defies the law, remember this, because she will vote in a federal election and actually get arrested at the polling place and get put in jail for trying to vote. Crazy. And when we talk about suffrage, I want to talk about the anti-suffragists because we're looking at a group of men and women who do not want to see women get the right to vote. What is that about? Here's what it's about. They are opposed to it because they feel like it's not in a woman's best interest to learn to vote. So here's a very famous political cartoon from a magazine called Harper's Weekly. You can see the date says February of 1907. Basically, the title of the cartoon is, "Oh, save us, senators, from ourselves. We can't vote. What will we do?" And there were many women who were in the anti-suffragist movement. So sisters not supporting other sisters. And here's the problem, is that they believe some of the craziest ideas. Women can't vote because women are high strung, women are irrational, women are emotional. Women are not smart enough or educated enough to vote. Women are supposed to stay home. They're not supposed to go out in public. Women are too physically frail to vote. They would get tired just simply walking to the polling station, let alone actually casting a vote. And if they vote, they're going to become too masculine if they vote. So I am telling you, talk about crazy ideas, but I mean, I can laugh at this when I look at this list now. It's so ridiculous. But if you think about it, this is a very similar argument to block women from doing other things, even in the year 2020. So maybe not so much the supposed to stay home, but I feel like we sometimes see these parameters put in place that women have nothing to do with creating, but yet they are forced to sort of abide by. So this is crazy. Regardless of the beliefs of the anti-suffragists, the 19th Amendment is going to pass. It will finally be ratified and added to the Constitution on August 8th, 1920. So we are in the 100th year, the centennial of women getting the right to vote. I wrote down the description for it here in a summary base. This will be on your test. It's a test question. So the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So finally, 19th Amendment is here. All right, so that's how women get the right to vote and some of the important voices along the way. Hope you took some good notes, and I will see you in class.